but to minimize as much as I can. In 18 to 24 months, it's happened 3 to 4 times. And all of those didn't create anywhere near the damage that they had before. But that's also been where I've really been able to get into the depth of my own trash and find even more hidden treasures. And now I'm flipping open the lid and looking inside to what rises up top pretty much as frequently as possible.
How different would it be if the same thing started looking now like it wouldn't change if nothing else really did? Subscribe and hit this like button and share this with a friend. Hey, this is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. This is Christian D. Evans coming at you. I thank you so much for listening to this. We interview top level 8 and 9 figure entrepreneurs, business owners, and CEOs that have either had an exit or they are actually running and scaling their business to that $1 billion valuation. We've also interviewed top level TEDx speakers as well as incredible psychologists, also a lot of wealth managers that manage $1 billion to $200 billion and more. We've had incredible guests like Sachin Kajarian, Cameron Herold, Jay Abraham, and so many others. So if you find this of value, then share this with a friend. And we really appreciate it. Guys, show our guests some love by liking this and subscribing. And guys, until next time, remember, be uncommon if you can, and enjoy the episode. Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning into Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. I'm your host, as always, Christian D. Evans. Now, this next guest, his life philosophies on how to embrace pain to avoid suffering, people before profits, and who before what, has helped individuals and companies discover and activate their limitless potential. He believes that there is a sleeping giant in every human, awakening those giants within and turning them into legends by helping them individual grab just what's out of their grasp is what his purpose in his life. His focus right now is to help and impact almost 1 billion people by 2045. Now, he is a human behavior and performance coach, speaker, and business strategist, disruptive strategy on how to create sustainable growth and lasting change personally and professionally. He is also the CEO and founder of Brian Bogert Companies, my friend, the one and only Brian Bogert. How you doing today, Brian?
I'm good, brother. Happy to be here with you.
Man, I'm excited about diving into this. And for those that don't know this story, I want to kind of really loop back around and build the foundation of your story here. August 10th, 1992, lay it out for us. And I'd love to unpack that and then go from there, man.
Yeah. 6:10 p.m. was a 115-degree day. My mom, my brother, and I went to our local Walmart to get a 1-inch paintbrush. And as we were headed back to our car, anybody who's known me for more than about 4 seconds isn't surprised when they realize I was the first one at the car, because I've always talked fast, I've always walked fast, and of course I was back there first. I wanted to get home and put that paintbrush to use. This was back in the days before there was key fobs though, so my mom had to literally reach into her purse, grab her keys, pull them out, stick them in the door, and turn them so we could go on with our way. And as we were standing there waiting for our car to be unlocked so we could go, a truck pulls up in front of the store, parks, and the driver and middle passenger get out. The passenger all the way to the right feels the truck moving backwards. So he did what any one of us would do, Christian, and he scooted over, put his foot on the brake, but he instead hit the gas. Now, only in this last year have I really thought about this more and realized that if I was in a vehicle moving backwards and I wasn't already in the driver's seat, there'd be an element of panic and rush, and I would put all of my force down into that pedal. And so instead of just like slowly hitting the brake pedal, I'd slam down on it. But in this case, he missed and he hit all that force onto the gas pedal. Combination of shock and force threw him up on the steering wheel, up on the dashboard. And before you could imagine, he was going 40 miles an hour across the parking lot right at us with no time to react. Goes up and over the median, the tree in the median, hits our car, knocks me over, runs over me diagonally, tearing my spleen, leaving a tire track scar on my stomach. And though I'm wearing a long sleeve shirt today, what I would normally do is pull up my sleeve and show you, but it ran over me and it completely severed my left arm from my body. Now, all of a sudden, my mom and brother are looking down at me. And the next thing my brother says is, "Mom, Brian's arm is over there, 10 feet away across the parking lot." Fortunately for me, my guardian angel was there that day. And I got to meet my guardian angel on the 30th anniversary of this accident this last August 10th. It was a nurse that walked out of the store right when this took place. And I've always said this for a long time, that I'm forever indebted to this woman, because she saw the literal life and limb scenario in front of her, and she chose to go into action instead of turning her head and going on with her way. That story became more powerful when I spoke to her for the first time this year and realized that she had a friend with her that day that was also a nurse who chose to turn her head and go on with her way. Now, I say this very clearly. I have no negative effects, nor do I have any zero blame, nor do I have any upset with her friend who turned her head. I only want to reinforce the point that she chose to go into action because of what she saw, and she stopped the bleeding, not only on the main wound, but she instructed some innocent bystanders to run inside, grab a cooler, and fill it with ice to get my limb on ice within minutes. She is singular-handedly responsible for giving me a chance to not only save my life, but also my limb, and I wouldn't be here with you today if it wasn't for her. So I know that's a little bit of a shocking story, right? And I always bring it back full circle to say, I've learned in all my time of doing this that yes, I realize the shock and awe of my story. It's very unique, but each and every one of us has a unique story. What's important is that we learn how to pause and become aware of the lessons we can extract from those stories so that we can become intentional with how do we apply those in our lives. And we all have the ability to do that. And we all have the ability to tap into the collective wisdom of other people's stories to shorten our own curve to learning. And so all I want to reinforce is that my purpose in life at this moment is to allow my truth to give others permission to live theirs. And it's about how we connect and understand that gives each other permission to lean into the things that is real in the human experience that so many of the world tells us to turn away from.
I really appreciate you sharing this. And, when I heard that story, I was like, wow, this is so impactful. And I want to kind of go a little bit throughout the journey for the young Brian. If you remember yourself that age, I know that wasn't just like what you just mentioned, so true, but I know that you weren't there in that moment, right? There was an evolution of that within, whether it's unpacking your own story, whether that reframed that experience, whether that was kind of analyzing it, whether that's therapy.
Yep.
And I want to ask Brian a little bit in regards to like that trauma, because that is very traumatic.
Yep.
Help me understand that evolution. What did you do? Who came in your life to help you unpack that, to reframe that,
Yeah.
to help you have the right experience and the right expectation in that situation?
Yeah. So it's been a 30-year journey. So we're only going to hit the tops of the waves, obviously. Because I would tell you I'm still unpacking and I still have people that are helping me process because the journey's not done and there is no final destination, only constant evolution of self. Right. But going back to the trauma and how I've had to move through that and so many ripple effects that I still deal with. I remember laying in that bed at 7 years old. Right. And one of the core lessons that I teach is that I learned very, very, very early not to get stuck by the things that had happened to me, but instead get moved by what I could do with them. And I'm a big believer that moved people move people. Now that lesson did hit me pretty early because as I was laying in the bed feeling sorry for myself, because that happened as a 7-year-old, I remember thinking to myself, why me? Why is this happening to me? What is my life going to look like? Am I going to be able to use my arm again? Like, what does this even mean? Right? At 7 and trying to understand also simultaneously because I felt like it was a dream in the beginning. And then when I realized it was reality, trying to process and unpack all of it, right? Real time. Now, that particular feeling of feeling sorry for myself didn't exist for very long because I believe perspective points us at what's important. And there was a number of families in the ICU that came up to us apologizing for the trauma that we'd experienced and feeling so bad for us and saying, we're so sorry for what happened to you. What can we do to help? And though our situation was extremely traumatic and certainly happened in a moment, we come to find out that their kids are laying in the hospital bed next to me across the hall with a terminal illness, and they don't know if they're going to live another 30 days. My life was secure. My limb was not at that moment, and it was a complete tumultuous process over the course of the next 5 years, and I almost lost it again when I was 20, right? But the reality of it is that all of that in the very beginning allowed me to center into the fact that I had my life and I was going to have my life, and so everything else was going to be pale in comparison to that understanding. And that hit me very early. The next thing that happened, though, is I processed that within the first few weeks. Not that I didn't deal with any issues around this for other periods or any emotional issues for other periods. I want to be really clear. Just because I say I understood that shift doesn't mean that I like healed and was just okay. No, instead I walk out of the hospital and I'm expecting like I'm going to be able to just live life and learn how to grow. And then a couple of things happen. I'm in a sling with a teddy bear in between my arm because the bone had to be at 90 degrees. And people would always ask, hey, what happened to you? expecting me to say, hey, I flew off the swing beating my brother in a competition, or I crashed my bike, or I fell off the jungle gym, or whatever, right? And I'd look them deadpan in the eyes and I'd say I was run over by a truck and my arm was torn off. Instantly, their jaws would hit the floor, and then they'd pause and they'd turn to my parents for validation. They didn't believe what I'd just told them. They didn't believe my own story. So very early, I started to be conditioned to this belief that I wasn't going to be seen and understood, and I wasn't going to be connected because people weren't going to believe my own truth, right? And then the second thing that happened was that each and every one of these individuals, many of them started then viewing me through the lens that they would have if they were in my situation, and started limiting me or believing what I'd be capable of through their lens of what they could do in my situation. And I hated that. So in both situations, I just walled up, not even knowing it at this time, but I walled up with an intellectual and mental narrative that's Brian good, Brian's tough, Brian's capable, he can do anything himself. And I proved what mental toughness could do because I went to the next level for that next period in my life to prove to the world and to prove to myself that I wasn't going to be limited by this, right? And I didn't realize all the damage that created that I've been unpacking now for the last few decades, right? Like the last 20 couple years. And so that was like really the beginning part of it that really put me into a position of understanding mental toughness and how to shape through it. But when I shut off physical pain, brother, because the demands exceeded my ability to cope, I shut off all kinds of pain, emotional pain, spiritual pain, mental pain. And I didn't realize it for 20 to 25 years later. So that's a much later portion in the story. But what this got us up to was like, I had to learn how to adjust and live and survive and try to get some semblance of identity in the physical world while I'm interacting with it differently and being completely limited by the lens the world was viewing me through. And so I had to figure out how to armor up and get tough enough to move through that. And that led me until I re-broke my arm in a snowboarding injury when I was 20. But that was that very first 12 to 13 year period after the accident of what did it look like? And, you know, obviously the insecurities that would come when I'm the only kid in high school that didn't have the same normal looking developing body as every other teenager, right? And wanting to see girls and get some sense of identity and connection and love and all of that wrapped up in that whole period. And so, yeah, that's the first part.
So you said a lot there, and I really appreciate you sharing that kind of that transformation throughout this. And I'm going to talk. There's so many subjects I want to go down, but I want to talk before we dive into identity and self-esteem and self-confidence, because that's what was that phase 2, if you will. Oh, that's you hit that. I want to talk a little bit about your anger. Was it when you were in that situation? Was it more of angry that you were in this situation? Was it shame or guilt that you put on yourself? Because you mentioned you did have a right perspective. You said, "Hey, I am grateful for being alive, and I'm going to have now. My arm's going to be kind of." That's a whole nother situation, but at least you had that perspective. But I'm just curious: did you deal with shame, guilt, or was it more of anger? I'm curious, or was it?
I was not aware of either of them at this point in my life. Right. And so I can look back and reflect and understand it. But I will tell you that I didn't even know I dealt with or was an angry person until as little as about 18 to 24 months ago. That might sound crazy. And I've talked about it absolutely a lot in so many situations. And I'm sure you picked that up through different podcasts and different pieces that you've consumed. But that's the crazy part is when I tell you I shut off pain, I shut off so much pain that I didn't realize I was dealing with shame. I didn't realize that there was worth and validation issues. I didn't realize that I was seeking connection through performance. I didn't realize that I was angry about the differences in my body and had combined developing anger through the further disconnected I felt from myself and from other people. I didn't understand the elements of increasing physical pain and how that impacted my anger. But oh, by the way, what I understand now is that anger is a secondary emotion. Anger is also armor because it's there to protect us. And so I didn't understand it in all those periods, but now I've had the ability to go back and effectively unpack it, because one of the things that I'm very clear on, and I'm still dealing with this myself, and this is now one of the big areas that we focus, is that there is literally one singular thing that is keeping you and everybody listening and myself and all of us from being their best self? There's one thing, like it's literally one thing. It's that thing that we've tried to compartmentalize. It's that thing that we've tried to avoid. It's that thing that we've not wanted to unpack or process, or not known that it's even there to unpack and process. Right? It's that thing that we've tried to put in a fucking box and put it up on a shelf and imagine that it was never there. Right? Yet it continues to come back and pattern in our life as our fatal flaw. And it's the trash from our past. Period.
This is
And so
incredible. So
go ahead.
yeah, please. Well, yeah, I just want to input this because just recently, 18, 24 months ago, you just started unpacking this. So you were experiencing this anger and shame and this and that, but you didn't really realize what that was because you put yourself in these almost like these walls, like you mentioned. And like you
Completely.
mentioned, that is somewhat good because you're able to perform, produce, you're able to do some amazing results, which is awesome. But externally, internally, so what was that pivotal moment in your life, that defining moment where, okay, I gotta unpack this at a deeper level?
So there was a few. I started to realize, and I think it's important to give just a little bit of context before I completely answer that, because what I had done in the first 13 years of my life was just push through and push down, right? Not realizing all of what I was doing. I continued to do that in the next 13 years of my life, but didn't understand that that's what I was doing, because what I sought after the re-break of my arm and the depression that went there and the 10 months and 7 surgeons that I went through because they were all afraid to touch me, I got absolutely depressed. And what I started to realize was how disconnected I was, right? And how much the world bought into my narrative, which was I'm good, I'm strong, I'm capable, I can do anything myself. So when I started to realize how disconnected I was, what that led me to was seeking human connection, which I believed were going to be structured through vulnerability and authenticity. I always say now that's the glue that binds human connection. However, I didn't have a healthy model of what human connection and what processing and unpacking and all those things actually looked like. So what did I do? I started to chase the what's of the world based on what I had seen as examples and models out there, because I believed that if I could exist in this place of pure darkness, depression, loneliness, and isolation because of the mental narratives and mental toughness I'd created for myself, that if I could lower that and I could put myself into a prominent position to have the things that the world told us we should desire, like house, money, car, success, right? Like all the what's of the world. Maybe I would just put myself into a position that would be admirable and people would want to be around me, and I might get that connection that I wanted. Right? So that led me down a whole different path, because what I really was chasing was who still, but I was chasing what because I didn't have a model on what who looked like. And so I chased the what, and it almost cost me the ultimate price because it cost me who I was. And so it also cost me almost all the relationships with the who's in my world, because as I was chasing the what's with all the armor that I continued with in this time, I was also creating a lot of damage because I was not aware of the shame, of the anger, of the armor, and the ripple effect of what that does in my life and my most intimate relationships. I wasn't aware. 27 years old, I wake up and I have accomplished and gotten all the what's that I wanted. We're now running a multiple 7-figure business. We're in a position that I never thought we'd be in financially. We've got a successful business. We have the house, we have the car, we have the money, I've got the beautiful wife, I've got the beautiful kids, I've got all these things. And then I look around and I'm still empty, right? Like I'm literally looking around with people that are making multiple 6 figures, 7 figures, 8 figures in some cases. And oh, by the way, so many of them were empty too, but we were still accomplishing all the what's of what the world should tell us we want, right? So I'm sitting here now all of a sudden like, wait a minute. I still am in search of who. And that's when I started to realize some of the disconnection with some of my shame and how much I was actually changing the ways that I was operating. And so that was the beginning of the shift. Then it was in my early 30s, a few years later, that my daughter and I were laying on the couch and we were playing, and arms around my neck, she kisses me on the cheek, and I start crying when she says, "I love you, Dada." Pure joy, pure connection, like pure warmth and love in this moment. Just incredible, right? And all of a sudden I'm sitting in this space where if I've never experienced joy this way, then every other emotion has also been on the grayscale. I've never really felt the depth of anything. And that's when I started to explore emotion. And I started to realize that human connection, vulnerability, and authenticity I had done in a strategic and tactical way, which is also why I was still empty, because human connection without emotion is not really human connection. That led me down a different path. And it was only a few years later that my wife then challenged me and said, hey, babe, I think that you're not seeing all of who you are. You're not having the impact on the world that you want. And I know you're barely scratching the surface of your potential. How would you feel if you didn't have to go to the office on Monday morning? And we doubled down on this bet and we went out and see what you could do in the world that I know you're meant to be in. Shame hit me really hard in that moment. I was swirling in it. My fear, all right, I was just absolutely flooded in it. And my doubt was making me drown faster than I could even imagine. And I had to really process that. And that's when I started to unpack my shame a lot more. And it was 10 months later that we executed our buy, sell, and left that business. It was about a year after that we were sitting on our back patio. So this was 2021. It was March, April timeframe. We'd unpacked a couple things in our marriage that were really positive. And then my wife told me, in not so many words, after a year earlier, I had left everything I knew to go impact the world by helping people identify and connect with who they are at the deepest level. She told me that things that I'd done in our marriage, patterns that I'd created, actions and behaviors, energy that I had caused her to lose who she was. That was like a knife to the heart. And I couldn't do anything but listen. And that unpacked the first part of a few different layers. And it was only 2 weeks later that we discovered anger. And that's when I realized I had to turn in, because I've always said for a long time that everything I do in my life is for the benefit of my family. It's the only thing binary in my world. But if I'm helping other people identify and connect with who they are, and I'm not dealing or taking out my own trash effectively, the stuff that I've been shoving down, that I've not been addressing, that I've not been looking at, that fatal flaw that keeps coming back. If I start burying my family in my trash, right, and I start literally creating and extending the generational patterns that I'd inherited and I'd exemplified through all these things I didn't see, then who the fuck am I, right? And last 18 to 24 months have been some of the most transformational growth moments in our life. But it was 18 to 24 months ago, that was that comment on the back patio with my wife that caused me to really see it all. And my anger was connected to my pain. It was connected to my arm. It was connected to my shame. It was connected to all these other things. And I'm happy to say that in 18 to 24 months, I gave my wife a promise on the patio that back weekend that I was going to do everything in my power to make sure that the negative impacts of anger wouldn't impact our house as a result of me again, knowing that it was going to happen, but to minimize as much as I can. And in 18 to 24 months, it's happened 3 to 4 times. And all of those didn't create anywhere near the damage that they had before. But that's also been where I've really been able to get into the depth of my own trash and find even more hidden treasures. And now I'm flipping open the lid and looking inside to what rises up top pretty much as frequently as possible.
Let's go back into that moment. If you can remember, Brian, on that back patio with your wife, you're sitting there and there's that vulnerability and authenticity. And what I find so interesting about that situation specifically is there was this trust established, there was this love. And I find your response, I want to ask the way you responded, because when she said that, that's hard. That's hard to hear, that truth, that being authentic and vulnerable. But also it's needy because you knew that there was trust, that, okay, I could trust this person, but also there was this love that, hey, she was doing it. She was saying this because she wants us to grow even deeper. But some individuals, they have a hard time interpreting that. They see that as more of a conflicting, like they have those walls up and it's, oh, you're coming inside my wall. I don't like that. I don't like that feeling. So it comes out as anger, right? In regards to kind of responding back to that situation. So how did you have the maturity to respond in a humble way to be able to unpack that, and now that evolution of what you got going on now?
My definition of suffering smacked me right in the face. There was no other option. I was laying in the bed I'd sewed. I'd created the patterns. I'd created this energy. And what I can tell you is that the prior 6 weeks that led to that discussion were very open and deep in a whole variety of ways, most of which is my wife's story, and I'll let her share that. But it led us down a few paths that already had me very open. But to give context, this was end of April, beginning of March. I would have told you we were in the best place in our marriage we'd ever been in 15 years. And a month and a half later, I'm sitting on my back patio, not actually in any way positive I'd still be married a month from that moment. It was that serious. And it wasn't my wife had this desire to grow deeper. Yes, that was a part of it. It was my wife drawing a boundary and drawing a line that I will no longer live like this. And if you choose to change, yes, my desire is to grow deeper. But I was faced with my own reality, which was I was blind to something that she'd tried to bring to my attention for the prior decade. And my ego didn't allow me to hear it. My armor didn't allow me to see it, right? And feel it. And despite the fact that we'd been in marriage counseling and patterns that we'd discussed related to this, I think that sometimes I'm very literal as well. And I think she tried to protect me up until that moment in the words that she chose. And for me, it was hearing exactly the truth that freed my armor, because there was no other option. I could sit there and react and create more damage and ensure the suffering in the future that I was afraid of, or I could pause and take a breath and process and respond, ensuring that I'm not creating any more damage in the moment. And that's what I felt, is that if in that moment she was able to be so open, she wasn't guarded, she was strong, she was clear, she was empathetic, she was trying to protect me even in her words, because she knew how much that would cut me. She knew that if she was going to pull that card, she needed to be prepared for either side of what could happen. And she was prepared to stand in it because of the trust that she'd started to establish, but the trust she was also trying to create. And so I'm indebted to my wife, because this was another moment that she allowed me grace. And it was something that I carried a lot of guilt and regret for, because there were times in the past that I questioned her strength. And not outwardly or challenged it, but like we had discussions, or I would make comments probably fueled in anger and shame that would embed that I thought she was weak in moments, right? Again, another protectionary piece of my trash and armor. And when I started to really unpack it, and I can own and accept the power of my energy and who I am and how I move that stuff, when I can infuse life into people the way that I know I'm able to, I started to imagine if that's flipped 180 degrees and I'm a pure weapon to destroy someone and rip the life out of them, I can only imagine the strength that would take to endure for 15 years. And so my wife, in that moment, showed a level of conviction around something that I hadn't been able to understand. And she presented it in a way that allowed me to receive it. And it opened the path that was very rocky for a little while after that, that has now led us to the place that we both have what we've wanted for the last 16 years, but it was right out of our grasp because it was hidden behind our trash. And so we are just in a place right now where that was needed to go through, but responding was the only option. If I had any hope of figuring out the pain that I needed to embrace to avoid the suffering that was sure to happen if I had reacted.
Brian, I highly respect the way you responded, because I remember there was a point in my life where I responded arrogantly. And I look back at that situation, and we do only have two choices. We could respond humbly and take ownership, which is tough, which is hard to say, oh, I caused all this difficulty. But then pride is, oh, I'm justifying it, I'm blaming it. So it's not my fault. And I just respect that just tremendously. I want to ask, and I want to loop back around in regards to your identity, self-esteem, self-confidence
Yeah.
during that teenage year a little bit. Okay, and I hope understand a little bit how you were able to maybe reframe, maybe kind of remove that identity away from, hey, I'm a handicap, or I'm this, I'm that. Right? There were certain things that you probably put, labels on to help you understand. Hey, just help us understand kind of what you did, and then maybe you're still unpacking that in today's world. So,
Yeah.
what did that look like?
I'm going to sit here and just own out of the gate. I'm sure I'm still unpacking pieces of it. I think that there's a lot that there's a lot of layers that have been removed. And when I talk about armor, right, like it really is the layers that we create, the layers of trash that we push down, the layers of armor that we create on the outside to protect. And it's typically associated with the layers of pain that we've experienced, right? And I want to be really clear that pain is like subjective, because it can't be measured independent of the person experiencing it. So this is never from a comparative standpoint, because it's all relative to each individual, right? But for me, again, I told you I shut off all the pain. I didn't even know it was there, right? And there were moments of insecurity that I remember in high school and different periods, but they were like moments, and they were quickly covered up with armor and ego that I didn't understand, right? That wasn't what I ever intended, whatever I thought. But when you have an ego or an armor with a really big personality, it's also very easy to be misunderstood, right? It's very easy for people to identify you as arrogant, egotistical, right? Cocky, right? And so those were terms that I experienced that I didn't identify with, because I also was very kind and empathetic and inclusive of people, and I didn't treat people meanly. But the whole world knew I was armored. They just didn't know what it was about, right? And that's the reality. I didn't know I was armored. But man, it was tough, because what I remember was always feeling the desire to be more deeply connected than I was. And I always desired to feel more comfortable in my own skin than I was, right? And did I extract that to any of the level of depth that I have to date then? No. I was a 15, 16, 17-year-old. And though I had elements of depth then, I also hid from a lot of it. And so what did I do? I used my emotional intelligence and my quick tongue to have a lot of girlfriends, right? To create all these kind of friendships that I was friends with everybody, but I never really had a home, right? Like I was one of those that knew everyone, had lots of different friends, but I never really went deep. What I look back on now is it's because I never really let anybody in, right? But that was also part of my protection. And that was a lot of my fatal flaw that bit me consistently, because of the trash that I kept burying down through all of that time. But I wasn't aware of it, right? Like I really legitimately was so blind to the amount of pain that I had and the amount of armor and protection and trash that I was carrying. And I don't ever blame someone for being blind to certain things. I think that so much of this, as it relates to our emotional triggers, which are our trash, right? Like it is that stuff that literally comes back. They're not our fault. 99% of the time. It's generationally inherited. It's passed down through us. It's because of something that happened to us. It's because of some trauma that we've processed. It's because of something that we've not been able to unpack or process. Typically, that's all it is. And then those experiences in our trash project into the future, where we get triggered in those moments. And then we're bringing our trash into the real-time moment, but it has nothing to do with what's in front of us. It has everything to do with those things that shaped our trash that we've been pushing down all this time. And so when I can look at all of that and understand this, I was in a period where I was just packing it in tight, and I was super blind. And I never blame anybody for being blind, but we can't be intentional with what we're unaware of. And so I was aware that I didn't live in an energetic place that was consistent with what I hoped to do. But I didn't take the time to actually understand what I was feeling, what it was pointing me towards, what my thoughts were, how it was creating the life that I either wanted or didn't want, and how that was aligning with who I wanted to become. Man, I didn't start doing that until far later. But as a teenager, right, like this is all that's happening. And I'm just pushing a bunch of stuff down, and I had a lot of stuff. So it got heavy and it got stinky. And it literally made me feel heavy and made me feel like I couldn't breathe. And it all came back to the same stuff that just slowly started to surface to the top. And I finally, in my 20s, started opening up the lid and looking inside to see what it was telling me, and started to create levels of depth in my understanding of self, to the point that today, man, I don't think at all about what I look like. I don't think at all about like how I'm interacting. Like I'm either feeling good in my body and connected to myself, or I'm not. And the external influence and lens no longer shapes or affects like my physical body anymore. I'm past that part. But there's still elements of that trash that's connected to other pieces of shame that I still get stuck in moments of imposter syndrome or fear of judgment, or right, like these are all the pieces that I'm still unpacking, because it gets deep. And though I'm very good in my physical body now, I have to now take this physical body and make it okay in the physical world, in every construct that we exist in.
Now you're saying some really good stuff here, and I find this so interesting. I've talked to a lot of people, and I've talked to some people that run an 8 and 9-figure business, and it's so interesting because I always love to talk about their journey, right? Their evolution, their defining moments of, like you just mentioned, how to unpack their trauma, their situation, their whatever. Because many people can perform and produce incredible stuff, but doesn't mean that they're authentic and vulnerable. And I've heard this numerous times, whether it's a male or a female, doesn't matter. There's this disconnect. There's not
Yeah.
allowing to be authentic and vulnerable for whatever reason. It may be fear, it may be fear of judgment, etc. So I want to talk a little bit about this. When you're working with a client, and I know you work with some very, very high caliber people, help me understand the proper way to process, right? Maybe the right questions to ask, because like you said, you're packing so much down.
Yeah.
So where do you start, right? And it's so many times it's so easy to think, okay, externally, whatever it is, but like really looking internally. Is that through meditation? Is that through more maybe asking certain questions? Or what did that look like for you, or maybe for some of your clients that you work with?
Yeah. Well, first, what I want to hit on is that I think that it's a very, very common pattern. A lot of high performers exist with some element of shame in their life. And many of us have learned how to seek validation and connection through performance. Right. And yet when we seek validation and connection through performance, it still feels empty. Right. And so that's like one of those things that so many people can identify with the feeling, yet they don't want to admit externally, because the world doesn't allow us to feel. It doesn't allow us to be vulnerable. And it actually oftentimes takes advantage of whenever we are in a position to be vulnerable, which makes us feel exposed, right? Nobody wants to feel that way. So what I really look at is a variety of things. And you asked a very deep question that there's not a singular pathway for, because every single person is slightly different. Okay. And the modalities of which to increase awareness, connection with self, start unpacking and processing truly can look different based on a whole variety of things: gender, hardwiring to think or feel first, like what narratives are stronger, what level of trauma, what level of anger and armor still exists, right? Like there's so many depths to this, but in some really, really simplistic ways. And I guess I'll ask you, would you be willing to play this out real time for your audience?
Yeah, let's go ahead. Let's rock and roll.
Okay, so let's just ask a couple quick questions and see where it goes, because this is a place to start for a lot of people. Who was the last person that made you feel like garbage?
I would say my ex-wife.
Okay. How did it feel in your body?
It hurt because someone that loved you so much, or supposed to, right, said some hard things. And my words of affirmation, that's my love language, and so that was even more impactful when she said those hurtful things.
Are you willing to give any context to what was said or the experience? And if no, that's okay. I ask for permission before I go deeper.
I appreciate, yeah, certainly. I certainly can. She basically said that I needed to get a psych eval because she thought I was full narcissistic. And I think what was happening, and so I did, I got a psych eval to jump through that hurdle, and that hurt. But then they came back and said, no, you don't actually, you're not a, narcissistic at all. You don't have those characteristic traits, etc. It was compensating for lack of words of affirmation, what I've discovered after unpacking that whole situation. But that hurt to hear someone say, something like that.
So how did it feel in your body? You gave a description on saying it hurt. Give me some specifics, like in your body, how did the hurt feel?
My body, I would say it was in my heart specifically. I remember it just drained me. And I remember it just felt, it didn't feel good in my body, if you will. I don't know how else to put it. It wasn't an
Give me any
ache.
physiological response that happened in your body when you were experiencing this.
I felt defeated. My
Okay.
body was just kind of, fell through, I guess, if you will. I'm
Heart
always kind of
rate,
like,
body movement. Give me a little more specifics.
yeah, I would say, okay, I get where you're coming from. My heart was, I started sweating. My heart obviously kind of raced a little bit. And then as well as I just, oh, you know what? I didn't feel like eating because it just didn't feel like, wasn't that
You have
hungry.
lack
It
of
just was,
appetite, right?
yeah.
So what you just identified, did you see how many times I had to take you deeper levels to even understand what was happening in your body? When the very first thing is I said, how did your body feel? How did it feel in your body? Right? Well, it felt hurt. Well, it felt a little defeating. It felt, we put these labels, but we don't actually pay attention to what's happening in our body. Right? And so many high performers in particular are so used to pushing through, right? In moments of performance, we're like, we don't pay attention because when we push through, that's what we've been told we need to do. But every time we do that, we're pushing down what's actually happening. Okay, so you were aware enough to understand these things, but here's what I believe. Okay, the human experience is rooted in four things. I believe we all of us, high performers included, desire to feel safe, desire to feel protected, and those are not the same thing, desire to feel seen and understood, and desire to feel connected. Okay, so the reality of it is we desire to feel seen and understood and connected the most, but they do not happen unless the first two do. Right? So when we don't feel safe, what do? We protect ourselves. Now let's just imagine, using the trash analogy, that I've now given you a big trash bag to hold out in front of you. Okay? Because when you protect yourself, this is your force field, right? Here's my trash. This is my trash bag. Okay, now let's assume you also have all the trash that you've been carrying your whole life in that trash bag. So it's got a little bit of weight. Okay, but here's what's going to happen now. Let's just assume your ex-wife or anybody else. Let's just call it one of those big 33-gallon or 32-gallon black trash bags. How are you going to properly portray who you are, your intent, your heart, your soul, your vulnerability, your authenticity, all of what you absolutely intend through that black force field, your trash bag? How can you portray that through a trash bag? And how can you expect someone on the other side of it to receive you authentically going through a trash filter? So when we feel the need to protect ourselves, we do this instinctually. It's human nature, right? But then again, I told you you're carrying this trash bag out. So what have you done? You've already prevented yourself from being seen and understood, and you've already prevented yourself from being connected, right? So in this case with your ex, you're like, we loved each other. She knew me. Does she really think I'm a narcissist? Like, she knows, she's been with me in these moments. Like, we had all this vulnerability in our life. Now she thinks I'm a narcissist. What she's probably reading is you probably feel completely vulnerable. Your armor is up completely, and she's not able to read that soft heart that she knows and exists in there. And she's just getting this hard exterior that's going to come across as an egotistical narcissist, which has just further separated you from being seen and understood and further separated you from being connected. Now, my friend, you've got this trash bag, and I told you, you've been shoving shit down in there for years. So let's just say it's a couple pounds. You're holding the trash bag out now in each hand. How long could you hold that there?
Not long, not long.
Right? You're going to start feeling the burning in your shoulders. Those bags
Yeah.
are going to start to want to drop, but you're going to keep them up there because that's what the world, if I keep my armor up, I'm good, right? So not only does it get heavier the longer we carry it and the more we shove down, the stinkier it gets, but it also starts incrementally crushing us over time. Right? And then the third thing it does is, brother man, there's two types of people. And just like there's two types of trash cans, those with lids and those without. We've got trash cans without lids, right? And those are the people that like wear their shit out on the sleeve, right? Those that sometimes you know what's going on. They've been shoving that trash down so long, but at some point the trash can's full. It starts flowing over to the top and coming into other people's worlds. Their trash just starts getting dumped off the top of their can because they can't shove it down anymore, right? Now it might not create damage, but it starts literally burying everybody and everything around them in their own trash, right? Their businesses, their relationships, their health, right? Then there's people like me, bro. I had a lid. I not only had a lid, mine had a seal on it. It was pressure sealed and it had a lock. Nobody was going to know that I was carrying around any fucking trash, right? So I've got this container, but dude, every time I'm crushing it down, more pressure builds up. It does get heavier. It does get stinkier, but I keep cramming it in and I keep locking it down. I keep pressure sealing it. I keep doing this. Guess what? At some point it's a bomb. And I send trash shrapnel through my entire world, creating damage. So the reality of it is you just talked about what are a couple of ways that we can start to understand that we aren't actually living as connected as we desire. It's who was the last person that made you feel like garbage, and really get clear on how did it feel in your body? Because what that points you towards is the pattern of what your trash is telling you, right? The treasures that are hidden behind the trash is you can perform, you can endure more pain, you can do all these badass things in the world. But the difficult part is that what you really want, that deep level of connection with yourself and those closest to you in your life, that you believe at this point may not ever be possible because you've not experienced it. I'm telling you, it's only a few layers below in your trash. You just got to dig in and take out your trash and then you can get to it. But brother man, your example was an exact perfect example. So thank you for playing ball, because here's the thing. I guarantee you that trash that's coming from a place of not being seen and understood and being disconnected is something that you've experienced multiple times in other areas of your life, where you've had a heart, an intent, a belief about who you are, what you want, what you desire, what you intend to communicate. And it's likely not been received in other places. That's made you feel disconnected, off guard, not understood, and not knowing where that comes from. So all I'm going to tell you is we just flipped open the lid. We looked inside to see what rose to top. But just like all of us, once we know there's trash there, just like we see in our house, it's up to us to take it out, because otherwise it's just going to keep piling up. And so just like I did with you, and just like I would do with any other performer, the reality of it is it's a matter of really starting to just be okay, sitting in, looking at, and taking out our trash on a regular and consistent basis. Because if we don't allow ourselves to live with trash in our homes, why do we allow ourselves to live feeling like trash?
Mm-hmm. So true, man. And I appreciate you just unpacking that. Just beautiful example. Safe, protected, seen, connected. Now, I want to loop in regarding authenticity and vulnerability. And I love talking about this because I did a TEDx talk just recently, and where I always visualize this, imagine this heart, and you're authentic, you're vulnerable, you get the most out of people, you're taking out your trash. But like you just mentioned as well, Brian, there will be people that respond with, with kind of hurtful things. And what is so interesting is, yes, you will get the most out of people. You are out there, you're taking your trash out, you're loving, but also anticipate, because you're in that situation, there will be people that will stab your heart, which will cause pain, but that's where trust comes in play. But I want to ask, in regards to your perspective, because we understand the value of authenticity and vulnerability, but also anticipating that, okay, hey, some people are not there yet, and they will intentionally or unintentionally, they'll hurt you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I want you to help us understand exactly how to work through that. Once we have owned our own story, unpacked our own trash, or in the process of doing that, like you mentioned, contextually, sometimes you start sharing it with your family. Your family's like, "Ooh, we don't talk about that. Ooh, just don't say that stuff." You know what I mean? And I think we've all been that in situations. So
we have.
We talk about that.
Yeah. So I think going back to what we all seek and desire, right? I think we all have the abilities to be the protectors and the connectors in all of our worlds. What that requires us to do is for us as the leaders in our families and our businesses and our situations to recognize that we can convince ourselves that we're safe so we can lower our own armor. And when we lower our own armor, what we have the ability to do is to wrap a layer of protection around the environments that we're in, the people that we're with, the situations, so that we can be the protectors, making sure that we create and facilitate an environment for others to feel safe. Because if they feel safe, their armor then comes down if they exist in that container. And then what we've done is we've facilitated the ability for everybody to feel safe, everyone to feel protected, everyone to feel seen and understood, and everyone to be connected. Now that sounds really simplistic, and it's like, yeah, that sounds a lot easier than it is to do. And there's truth to that. It takes practice and consistency. But I will tell you that I am a big believer that true strength actually hides behind vulnerability. And what I am very clear on is vulnerability does not mean that you need to be fully exposed. It means that you need to exist in the human experience and be able to connect, understanding that it's our shared experiences, empathy, and compassion that bond us. And so if we understand that, just like we have layers of pain and layers of armor and trash, there's layers of vulnerability, right? We don't have to tell a stranger our entire life story and all of our deepest wounds just because we just met them. But could we give a real honest response when they say, how are you? And you're like, you know what? It was a little bit of a rough morning. I'm dealing with some stuff because my mom is having some health issues and I'm having to just process through that. Now, my mom's not having health issues. I just made that up on the spot. But point is, like, can we allow ourselves to be real and own where we're at in the given moment, shaping at least with some context of what's appropriate to still share with layers of relationships? So for me, it's about pushing yourself to one level of discomfort to share something that might just seem a little bit uncomfortable. And practice doing that and practice seeing how safe you actually are, because when you share from a place of vulnerability, it's not only most of the time received, it's often reciprocated. And so if we can understand that vulnerability and authenticity are the glue that binds human connection, then it's incumbent upon us to be the protectors and connectors in the spaces we create. Because when we can exist in that way, literally, most of the time, our suffering exists because of 4 things that our inability to be vulnerable and authentic actually ensure. Suffering internally exists in 4 areas: the things that are left unsaid, the things that we lack permission to feel or say, the things we lack the words to articulate or to understand, or the things that are left undone. When we are vulnerable and we share our truths into the world, and we are authentic and we are empathetic and we can be objective and non-judgmental in how we receive people, we give people the ability to get permission to feel and say things that they wouldn't otherwise, and to give them words and experiences to understand and articulate something that they might be experiencing that they might not be able to without our example. Our stories actually free other people. Our stories bond us. And our stories are the only way that we can effectively take out our trash and create a model to help others consistently take out theirs as well. I don't know about you, but I'm tired of living in a world where so many people feel like garbage. And I'm tired of living in a world where it's okay to treat people like trash because you're burying people in your own. Guess what, everybody? We all have trash. You have trash. It's up to us to deal with it. And by the way, when we start to do that, we feel lighter. We can breathe. We're more connected. Ironically, when we actually take out our trash, we get all the things in life that we want and desire. Most people just aren't really eager to become garbage men or garbage women because it's feeding the ego. But guess what? It's that foundational work that even in your businesses, if nobody's above taking out the trash, everything flourishes. And that's a set tone from the top as a protector and connector.
I love this conversation, Brian, and I just love your wisdom. And what is so beautiful is your authenticity and your vulnerability, but also the journey that you had to go through yourself to then turn around and now being able to make such massive impact in so many people, right? Whether you're running a CEO, corporate America, whether you're running a massive business, and just massive amounts of wisdom, Brian. I really appreciate this. For those that are listening and like, okay, they realize that they've got a lot of trash, like you mentioned, that it's kind of vacuum packed, or maybe they're sitting there like they're in that process, but they want someone to take it to the next level, unpacking it, maybe at a deeper level. How do they reach out? Because I know you have tons of resources. You've been featured in a lot of different places. How do they get involved with what you got going on, my man?
Yeah, we've actually got a lot going on. So if you're on social media, at Bogert Brian on any of the channels is a great place to get a hold of us. What I would tell you is that if you are a web person, go to brianbogert.com and you'll find all the ways to connect with us. Two things specifically that I'll offer to anybody who's listening today. We are working on a project right now. We're actually doing a pilot show right now called Trash Talk, where we are giving people the opportunity to get free coaching over the course of a 30-minute window, where we are literally coming in and helping do in a very quick but powerful way, helping people identify and take out their trash in the span of a 30-minute window, so that we can also show how quick it is to start to move. So if people are interested in that, let me know, because we're looking for a whole list of individuals to come be a part of this, because this is likely something we're going to be doing on a big level in perpetuity, and we're filming a pilot right now. So that would be a great way. DM me, shoot me an email, whatever. The other thing is that we've got a growing community. It's called the Rapid Fire Coaching Community. And what we're doing is demonstrating what vulnerability and authenticity look like. It's a group where we cover some of the topics that I go through with all of my coaching clients, but then we do rapid fire coaching. The last call, we got through 10 individuals in the course of an hour to help them actually get through their biggest problem that they were facing that week. The more vulnerable people get, the stronger the group gets, and the more consistency there is in connection. And we give 45 days free to anybody to come join to experience it. We meet 3 times a month on Zoom. So I just want everybody to know that these are ways to go about it. But oh, by the way, it's $44 a month after that, because this is the thing that we created to make sure there was no barrier of entry from financial reasons for people to get the coaching and support that they need. So we're doing this in a big way there. And then there's a whole slew of other resources, but those are 2 specific areas. If anything you heard today was relevant to you and you want to get a quick coaching session on Trash Talk, let me know. Or if you want to come be a part of a growing, flourishing, vulnerable, and authentic connected community, let us know on that as well.
Awesome, Brian. Again, I really appreciate your just time being on here and just unpacking this at a very deep level. We'd had some really good conversations here. Guys, those links are in the description below, so make sure you stop what you're doing. I'll put all of his social media down there. LinkedIn, he's very active on all the content out there. Also his website, so you can stop. And then also those specific links that go directly to those 2 services that he's providing. And I really appreciate you doing that. Brian, before I let you go fully, I always love to ask my guests, is there any last words of wisdom that you'd like to share with our audience?
You know, I've said this a little bit differently, but I'm gonna spin it around right now. Nobody's coming to take out the trash for you, right? Nobody. And it is something that is very simple to do. And so all I'm asking each and every one of you to do from an actionable perspective is, every day when you go take out the trash in your business, you go take out the trash in your home, all I want you to do is flip open the lid and look inside you. What trash is existing on top? What's it pointing you towards? It's your choice whether or not you do anything with it. But what I want you to do just for the time being is just look inside. Raise your level of awareness so you at least know what's in there. And then it's your choice how to handle it from there. Thank you very much for building a platform for me to come pour good into the world, my friend. Christian, I appreciated the conversation with you. And brother, man, if there's anything I can do to help you or anybody listening, by all means, just please let us know.
And that is the CEO and founder of Brian Bogert Companies. Guys, that is Journey with Christian D. Evans podcast. Until next time, be uncommon if you can. Thanks so much, Brian.